You're one of Canada's preeminent religious scholars and spent virtually entire adult life analyzing, teaching, writing about the biblical scriptures. How in the world did you ever come to doubt the existence of the historical Jesus of Nazareth?
Well, there's no simple answer to that. It took a little time. It became increasingly obvious to me over the last 7 or 8 years that the Jesus Seminar, which has been devoting 25 years to a study of what are the authentic words of Jesus, what are the authentic actions of Jesus, we're paring it down to smaller and smaller amounts, to the point where about 18%, I think, of what he said they thought might be authentic, and about 17% of what he is said to have done might be authentic. And in the course of watching that process and realize that Jesus was slipping away on them, and knowing myself from my own scholarship, that there was nothing coming out of the first century at all in the way of hard evidence for his existence. We had the Gospels, whose dating is not quite as precise as people would lead us to believe, and only really come together fully about 150 Common Era. But their origins, the tradition is believed to have come out of the first century. But apart from Josephus, a Jewish historian, who has 2 interpolations, which are later Christian forgeries, mentioning Jesus Christ, we have nothing from the first century. This is why there was such a big foo-hurrah about finding the supposed ossuary of James, the brother of the Lord.
That we had at the Royal Ontario Museum.
Well, we had at the Royal Ontario, and all the scholars happened to be meeting here. Everybody was beside themselves, because here, for the first time, in this little box that held bones, they thought they had something from the first century that was outside of. But that went up in sheer smoke and flames once they actually got down to looking at it. They realized it was a forgery. So I realized there was very little. I'm interested in evidence. If it's going to be history, let's have evidence. The funny thing was, Alan, the farther the church got away from the supposed time of Jesus' life, the more sure it became of what went on. The closer it got to that supposed time, the more vague it became. That's the very reverse of what happens with any truly historical person.
I want to get into evidence, but first you've called your book The Pagan Christ.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, this is partially to still continue the answer to your original question. I, at this point, about 3 years ago, was sent by a chap whom I didn't know, but who was a United Church clergyman, some material. He said, I think you should look at this material. And when I started to read it, I realized I was looking at a payload of fact, of evidence that I'd never seen in my life before. And as I examined this, at first I thought it can't be, and as I went on, I realized cumulatively it was. And it was proof that prior to the 3rd or 4th centuries, Christianity had been very different from the way it was after Constantine, the Council of Nicaea, and the 4th century, that a big change had taken place. And in the course of that change, a story which had once been a universal pagan myth, belonged to the Greeks, before them to the Sumerians, and particularly to the Egyptians, that myth had been clad in Jewish form and made into a history, into a literal story. And that's what struck me when I saw that had happened, and the way in which they were prepared to kill, to burn books, to destroy the evidence of it having happened, that I realized something untoward was really at work here.
Well, let's give our viewers some sense of the similarities, because you go through this evidence and you say, well, here's the New Testament. I mean, that virtually everything that Jesus was reported to have done in the Gospels, from the Sermon on the Mount to the crucifixion, was told in ancient Egyptian religious writing. Give us some examples there of the same kind of stories that were being told 4 or 5 centuries earlier.
Oh, more than that, even thousands of years earlier. Yeah, this was my astonishment. When I read for the first time, Alan, a story that had always, I used to be a professor of New Testament, a story that had always been problematic for me, the raising of Lazarus, which is in the 4th Gospel, and it's the most dramatic miracle that Jesus is supposed to have carried out. He raised a man from the dead who had been dead 4 days. He was really dead. When I came across that story in all its full details, in an Egyptian dress, in an Egyptian setting, right down to to Martha and Mary, and to the coming forth out of the tomb, in every detail, in 1700, before the Common Era, 17 centuries earlier, I realized I was onto something.
Those same scholars, Spong, and are not unaware of the work of
well, yes.
And their analysis was, well, these stories, these myths of that were found in Egyptian religion and in Greco-Roman religion simply foreshadowed the existence and the coming of Jesus.
This is what they say, and I was force-fed that all through seminary, and as 7 years as a professor of New Testament, I force-fed it to my students, and it was hokum, and it was wrong. It's not just foreshadowing. When you get down to 180 exact parallels found between Horus and Jesus, 180 exact parallels, where he's saying, I am the bread of life. This is Horus. Or what the evangelicals keep throwing at me. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. So how are you going to get around that one, brother? And I said, well, have a look at this. 2,000 years earlier, I am the way, the truth, and the life being said. I mean, it is so precise and so exact. I can't, it blows you away.
Now,